Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with another episode of the Chaos Dwarf Q&A, and today we are continuing on with the Chaos Dwarfs Worldwide Part 2. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it. Our first question for today is, can any other races create Daemon Engines? Weirdly enough, yes. The Daemons of Chaos have a bizarre demon engine known as Soul Grinders. These, quote, totally not purely intended for 40k models that just got fantasy lore and rules because all demons were supposed to be available in both settings, unquote, monsters are really interesting actually. When a demon's physical body is destroyed, they're usually banished to the Forge of Souls, where they get to undergo the agonizing and slow experience of having their forms put back together. However, if for some reason they wish to expedite this process, the demon in question can sell its true name to the Forge of Souls, which is what, puts them back together. This dark bargain will have the crippled demon's essence fused to a vast hunk of a substance known as warp metal, thus being reborn as a soul grinder. Not a machine possessed by a demon per se, but more of a freaky hybrid monstrosity. That being said, there have been others who have crafted weird demonic powered machines. They're pretty damn rare outside of the Chaos Dwarfs Hellforges, but occasionally someone will strike a bargain or curse the forging process of some war machine to create one such abomination. The Black Kraken vessel from the Dreadfleet game is one such nightmare, being a gift from the Dark Gods in exchange for the soul of that monster's captain, although he may have had a little bit of interaction with some of the Chaos Dwarfs in one of their southern ports. Another you can learn about by reading the Gotrek and Felix book Manslayer. I won't spoil what exactly goes down, but at the end of Manslayer there is essentially, you can kind of think of it as a demon engine, but it's more like a demonic entity that is comprised of multiple war machines that the two of them fight at the end of the story. I don't want to get super into it because it kind of ruins the whole book, because that book has a little bit more of a mystery as to who the bad guy is. It's not a huge mystery if you're used to plots like that, but I don't want to spoil it for anyone that's reading it. Next up, what all can be said for the Chaos Dwarf Empire? As in how big it is, what is it exactly, are there any notable settlements outside of Zharr-Naggrund, yada yada. The Chaos Dwarf Empire is much like the Chaos Dwarfs themselves. Fairly squat, but incredibly deadly. The actual Empire of Hashit's Children encompasses most of the Darklands. However, in reality, they don't have full control over this area in truth, and have more like circles of influence. Their empire starts in the north with Zorn-Uzkul, that extremely elevated plateau that begins once you exit the eastern side of High Pass. Most of their might in this area is consolidated around Uzkalak in those northern mountains, which, although technically an abandoned dwarf hold, does actually have a large garrison fortress built around it that is functionally a city. From here, their empire stretches south to the plain of Zharr, where most of their might is concentrated, as it is a sunken plain within the Darklands, within which their capital city resides, Zharr-Naggrund. From there, you can follow the river ruins south down the Darklands, which is essentially no man's land, until you reach the Black Fortress, which is a massive military outpost where the Infernal Guard reside, and it's ruled over by Drasoath the Ashen. From there, the Chaos Dwarfs control the river ruin all the way south into the Sea of Dread. To the east of the Black Fortress is the Desolation of Asgore, which they have a tenuous hold over, thanks to another massive fortress in that elevated plateau where the Tower of Gorgoth resides. The Tower of Gorgoth completely dominates the surrounding area, and it oversees a truly terrifying amount of mining pits and toxic waste dumps all around. That essentially is the geography of their empire, but the Chaos Dwarfs don't really maintain much control over the large swaths of wasteland between their main strongholds, those being, of course, the Tower of Gorgoth, Uzkalak, the Black Fortress, and Zharr-Naggrund. There are maybe a couple little minor things scattered around there. We talked about it yesterday, but in the Wulfric novel, Wulfric attacks like a more minor mining outpost, and there are a couple other places that if you read various books, they might like kind of toss out a small Chaos Dwarf port or city, but they're all functionally within the Darklands, but those are the big four. As for the industry of the Chaos Dwarf Empire itself, the lands of the Dawi Zharr's empire are just a dry, hot hellscape that actually extends incredibly deep underground, where they're forever gouging open the earth for minerals and boiling vents of magma. I mean, we're talking miles and miles of infrastructure full of deadly fumes, razor-sharp black sand, and countless bleached bones from millennia of collected death. There are also endless pits where gallons of toxic waste produced by the industry of the Chaos Dwarfs sits out in the open, poisoning anything that gets too close, essentially creating horrific quagmires where only death can exist. Finally, their actual settlements outside of Zharr-Naggrund are, in design, just towering monstrosities of dark iron and black obsidian that raise impossibly high into the sky, belching out endless quantities of black smoke that rains down acid rain on the surrounding environment in a show of what the Chaos Dwarfs will turn the entire world into should they have their way. But yeah, essentially just imagine the ultimate dystopian nightmare version of like Fallout's wasteland zones, and you pretty much got it when it comes to what the Chaos Dwarfs empire looks like. Our next question is, are the Chaos Dwarfs a threat to the world? So the question is kind of, are they a global threat along the kin of the Warriors of Chaos or Greenskins, or are they really only a localized threat? So for this question, I would honestly say that the Chaos Dwarfs are an extreme threat to the world at large due to their policy of selling or lending out weapons of mass destruction in order to further their own influence and, of course, please Hashut. This has led to the likes of the Warriors of Chaos being able to assault various types of defenses that had once been impossible for them to deal with. The weapons of the Dawi Zharr have been used to wage war against every nation, even including as far away as Lustria and Cathay. If not for the Chaos Dwarfs, the massive fortresses and mighty walls used by the forces of order across the world would be much better equipped to hold back the tides of chaos. So, hopefully that answers that. Do the Demons of Chaos hate the Chaos Dwarfs for using them to make weapons? Not as a racial trait, I would say. We spoke about this a bit yesterday, but the demons who have had the misfortune to be bound in such a way will never forget such an insult. The Chaos Dwarfs have made countless enemies in the realm of chaos. I would not be surprised if a few had turned into soul grinders in their eagerness to get revenge. But if anything, this is a fact that I'm sure would just bring the little black hearts of the Chaos Dwarfs quite a bit of cruel mirth rather than any fear or concern. Our next question, with how dwarfs / Chaos Dwarf culture tends to view / treat women of their own race, do the Dawi Zharr treat the women of other races in any notable fashion? Not really. The Chaos Dwarfs only give a damn about the women of one other race, which is dwarfs. The main issue with the dwarfs as a species when it comes to population is that their ratio of male to female is just miserable. So it makes sense that the Chaos Dwarfs would consider Dawi Ren, which is what the Chaos Empire dwarfs refer to women as, to be the ultimate prize, which is definitely a potential in a situation not best dwelt on. You know, evil's gonna evil, y'all. Alright, moving on. What are all the races that the Chaos Dwarfs have had major encounters / conflicts with? So, as we covered last episode, the Chaos Dwarfs have technically met with every race on the planet at some point, as they'll sell out their war machines and the crews to man them, which ends up getting the Dawi Zharr to some bizarre places. They have unleashed hell cannon fire on Hexawaddle in Lustria, blown apart portions of the Great Bastion in Cathay, and devastated at least one city in every nation of the Old World. However, I'm going to assume your question pertains more to those who have met the Chaos Dwarfs as an actual force, like an army of Chaos Dwarfs that they have battled against, instead of just, being mercenary tagalongs. In that case, the list narrows quite a bit. The Dawi Zharr rarely leave the Darklands in any meaningful numbers, but there have been a few instances in which they'll take their axes to someone that has irritated or insulted them. Their primary foes are, of course, the Greenskins, who are not terribly fond of the Chaos Dwarfs, enslaving millions of their kind, and in general have a few thousand years worth of grudges to settle with the stunted folk of Hashut. The Ogre Kingdoms have also waged many wars against the Chaos Dwarfs, with entire invasions having attempted to smash down the walls of Mingol Zharr-Naggrund. In the modern age, under Over-Tyrant Greece's Goldtooth, these hostilities haven't been raised in a few centuries, but the ruler of the Ogre Kingdoms has been turning his greedy gaze to Zharr-Naggrund and its wealth more than often as of late. Then, of course, there are the Warriors of Chaos, who, although often employ the Zharr, there are also an incredible number of hordes that instead try to tear down their obsidian towers as a show of strength to the Dark Gods, or simply due to negotiations breaking down. Not every warlord thinks he should be forced to bargain with something he could simply try to kill instead. The Demons of Chaos aren't terribly fond of them either, those immortal denizens of the ether quite sour about the whole being used as fuel for various tools and toys. Those who have broken free of their various forged prisons in particular tend to be nursing a wounded pride and will gather up demonic legions to swarm down upon the Zharr from time to time, especially if a storm of magic comes into the area, which would allow a sizable demonic host to form and start attacking the walls, or maybe just manifest in the streets themselves of Mingol Zharr-Naggrund, though the Chaos Dwarfs seem well prepared for such eventualities. After that, there's of course the Skaven, in particular Clan Skryre, who have a massive rivalry with the Chaos Dwarfs and would love nothing more than to prove their superiority at designing engines of mass devastation. This actually led to the Nightmare of Drakkenmor incident in 2037 of the Imperial calendar, where the two factions met on the battlefield in a cataclysmic show of magic and firepower. The result of unleashing such colossal amounts of chaotic energies and death caused a terror in reality which spat out an immense storm of magic that just leveled both armies and summoned tides of demons that ravaged the lands within 100 leagues of the battle for a full year before the roiling energies finally expended themselves and died out. Of course, both sides claimed victory, despite the fact that neither of them were able to walk away from this particular incident, which, although happened roughly 500 years before the modern age, has still resulted in just permanent scars in the lands of Drakkenmore. Back to their major conflicts, the Tomb Kings have actually faced off against the Children of Hashut on a surprising number of occasions, both when they were the living empire of Nehekhara and after becoming the skeletal legions we know today. The pass between the lands of the dead and the Darklands have frequently played host to these two races clashing. Then, of course, there are the vampire counts. For many of those undead abominations have sought various artifacts or places of power in the Darklands, most notably the Dragon Graveyard, which often draws them into conflict with the Zharr residing at the Tower of Gorgoth. Then, of course, there was the Fortress of Vorag, ruled over by the first Ghoul King of the Strigoi bloodline, who was right on their doorstep. Though Vorag Bloodytooth met his end at the hands of the Greenskins some time ago, supposedly, there's still quite a ghoul infestation in the area that I'm sure causes the Dawi Zharr no end of grief. The High Elves have also clashed with the Chaos Dwarfs in open battle before, though such engagements are rare. We do have records that when the Chaos Dwarfs attempt to send their navy into the open sea, conflict often erupts between the two races, and there is an ancient tale of a place known as Anorel's Tomb in the mountains southwest from the Fortress of Vorag, where a great High Elven prince was buried a long time ago, that the Chaos Dwarfs ended up popping up around because they kind of keep eyes on the area, and the two armies clashed there, but this was in a prior age. Let's see, I suppose if you count the degenerate primitives on the Dragon Isles, then the Lizardmen have fought with them in major conflicts, but I wouldn't count that. There's of course Kislev, who have attempted in the past to extend their empire through High Pass and contest the Northern Darklands, which no doubt has drawn the ire of the Dawi Zharr, considering how close that is to Uzkalak. Plus, when the Chaos Dwarfs go looking for nearby slaves, that would actually be the nearest nation of men to assault. Then last, but certainly not least, are the brave Dawi of the World's Edge Mountains. The most bitter hatred exists between these two races, of course, and they have met on the battlefields only rarely, but it does indeed happen. Karakadrin of all the major holds has probably clashed with the Chaos Dwarfs the most often, as they hold Peak Pass against the hordes of Chaos, who would seek entrance to the old world with contracted Dawi Zharr in tow. If you, during the incident known as the Road of Skulls in the Gotrek and Felix series, there was a sizable group of Chaos Dwarfs that laid siege to Karak-Kadrin along with the Warriors of Chaos, and also during the Storm of Chaos timeline, which is not technically canon anymore, but when Archaon invaded the old world during the Storm of Chaos, an actual entire army of Chaos Dwarfs tried to invade the Empire from the east. And I believe they came through High Pass, but yeah, I'm pretty sure, or no, they came through Peak Pass. They tried to come through Peak Pass, and the armies of Karak-Kadrin and Zufbar actually teamed up to fight them back. And if you own the Dwarf Omnibus, which I think nowadays is called the Masters of Stone and Steel, they actually have that battle featured in one of the novels, which is a fun read. But yeah, hopefully that will answer that. And with Total War Warhammer 3 on the horizon, I honestly cannot wait to see these two throw down for the first time in a long time. Next question. Who all do the Chaos Dwarfs trade with / create weapons for? Are there any particular notes about their trade? The Chaos Dwarfs will create or trade weapons and armor to anyone willing to pay and negotiate with them. If you bring slaves or come to bargain with the Chaos Dwarfs, they will hear you out, though it's best to be on guard at all times just to be safe. They do have a strong sense of honor, but it's very twisted and full of a ton of loopholes that they will happily exploit against the unwary. Plus, just making the journey to meet with the Chaos Dwarfs is full of danger due to roving tribes of ogres, raiding hordes of greenskins, and terrifying monsters always looking for something to eat. Not to mention, the hobgoblins are treacherous little bastards who will gladly sink a dagger into your back when their master's attention is elsewhere. In any event, as the Chaos Dwarfs are quite intimidating and only interested in the trade of slaves or exceptionally rare materials, most races either have nothing to offer them or refuse to trade with them on principle. The warriors of chaos and other chaos-worshipping humans of the world are always eager to barter, which has formed a somewhat reliable, if tense, partnership between the two factions. The ogre kingdoms also tend to form trade agreements with the Dawi Zharr, handing over captives from war, large beasts like giants, or even mass amounts of meat in exchange for weapons, armor, and of course cannons, which is how many of the ogres known as lead belchers get their signature guns. For the Chaos Dwarfs, such exchanges are always well worth it, as the items the ogres desire are little more than children's toys from the perspective of the Dawi Zharr. It's just, they're basically always trading up in that relationship. Beyond that, it is rather rare for anyone else to dare contacting the Dawi Zharr in the name of trade. While the Dark Elves seem like natural partners, the two races both greatly desire slaves above much else, plus both are so supremely arrogant, it is hard to imagine them having a meeting that would not break down and end in violence and declarations of war. Likely the two are well aware of one another's existence and studiously avoid each other. Plus, no elf would ever be caught dead bartering with a dwarf of any kind for weapons, armor, or war machines. To do so would be like admitting the dwarf craft is superior, which they would of course fervently deny. However, it is worth noting there have been a few rare individuals who have managed to strike bargains with the Chaos Dwarfs despite their races being enemies in every other circumstance. The most notable example of this is actually Ikit Claw, the famous Skaven of Clan Skryre, who somehow managed to convince the children of Hashit to take him on as a sort of apprentice and mingle Zharr-Naggrund, despite their usual kill-on-sight policy with Skaven after a few sour incidents. Perhaps he managed to work out that dark deal before relations soured between the two races, though I highly doubt it. Ikit Claw is a clever son of a gun, though, so maybe he just offered them things that the Skaven of Clan Skryre would normally never agree to give the Dawi Zharr, but, Ikit Claw is only out for himself. As for particular notes about their trade, just like their western kin, the Chaos Dwarfs will never simply trade with you. You will be forced to barter with them, which is noted to be an excruciating process, as the Dawi Zharr are careful not to seem weak or easily manipulated. So expect negotiations to last for days, and they will vigorously argue every single damn point of the pact being made, even if it's something they normally, internally would be totally okay with and agree with. They're still gonna badger you on it. Because to them, it's mostly almost like a sport or a form of entertainment, where they want to try and make agreements into just pure agony so that they can kind of argue that they weren't, being soft or weak, which of course in their culture is highly frowned upon. They really want you to suffer, even if it's beneficial to them. Partly because it's a cultural thing, and also because they're just mean and they think it's funny. So, there you go. Next up, do the Chaos Dwarfs utilize mercenaries? If so, who do they turn to? The Chaos Dwarfs do not utilize mercenaries in a traditional sense, in that they would never allow some kind of bought force to fight alongside them in battle, because, they could just enslave you instead. That being said, they functionally actually operate like mercenaries themselves, more than happy to send out war machines and sometimes even regiments in order to join alongside some invasion in exchange for pick of slaves in various pacts. And while they may never hire some third party to join their forces, the Dawi Zharr are always eager to bargain with any slavers bold enough to approach them with trains of captives ready to be sold into the chains of Mingal Zharr-Naggrund. If they want some kind of auxiliary to their armies like ogres or giants, as I said, they'll just enslave the thing in question. Why pay for something that you can just force to serve you? But, you could argue that hobgoblins, ogres, and giants are not, they're not part of the Chaos Dwarf society, but they do fight in Chaos Dwarf armies and function kind of like mercenaries, but as I said, they're enslaved. The Chaos Dwarfs would never pay you to fight for them. they would expect you to pay them to fight for you, or they would throw you in chains and say, okay, you work for us, but you don't get paid, you just get to not be killed until you die of exhaustion or die on a battlefield for us. Next up, how wealthy is the Chaos Dwarf Empire? The Zharr are without a doubt one of the wealthiest nations in the world, despite their relatively low population and size. The secret to this incalculable wealth is actually what led to the damnation of the Chaos Dwarfs in the first place: Zorn-Uzkul and the Plain of Zharr. You see, the entirety of the Darklands is actually incredibly rich in mineral wealth, gems, etc., due to the extreme number of volcanoes, which, although make the wastelands unfriendly to life over the millennia, have filled the deep earth with immeasurable treasures for those willing to seek them out, as it's just constantly churning up with extreme heat and high pressure. But the northern areas of the Darklands, notably the Plain of Skulls, which is Zorn-Uzkul, and the Plain of Zharr, are even richer, which is why the early dwarfs risked their lives establishing that first hold of Uzkulak. The Chaos Dwarfs have little interest in gems, gold, or other forms of traditional material wealth from other realms, and they have so much to the extent that it's just comical and borderline worthless. The only thing they care for are slaves, which are the one requirement for their endless industry that they cannot simply rip out of the ground. I would say only that the Dawi of the World's Edge Mountains, the Ogre Kingdoms after Greasus got them to understand the value of gold, and the sheer size of Grand Cathay can really compete with Hashit's children when it comes to just raw wealth. Maybe the Lizardmen of Lustria, they do have an entire continent to themselves, so I would probably toss them in on that. But yeah, the Zharr are fabulously wealthy, and they know it. So, yeah, they're definitely in the top 3, I would say. Maybe the top 5 if you wanted to penalize them for their size. How do the Ancestor Gods feel about the Chaos Dwarfs? There isn't much of a record of how the Ancestor Gods feel in particular about the Chaos Dwarfs, but from what we do know about them, it would not be a friendly response. The absolute best case scenario is the likes of Valea would be saddened by their existence and likely pity what they have turned into. But Grugni, Grimnir, Gazul, and the rest of the dwarf pantheon would feel nothing short of disgust and rage at what those utter fools have lowered themselves to in their desperation to survive no matter the cost. That goes very heavily against dwarf principles, where it would be much more accepted to just accept your death and fight to the bitter end, but hold on to your I don't want to say pride, but to hold on to your value, to your values, to your purity. It would be better to die with your head held high than give yourself over to something like Hashit. Would the Chaos Dwarfs ever set aside their hatred towards the likes of the dwarfs to deal with a mutually dangerous foe? No. The Chaos Dwarfs would stop at nothing to destroy their estranged kin, which is something I think the Dawi of the Karas Ankor would eagerly agree with. If there was a mutual enemy that threatened the both of them, I think they would just try... if they could see each other and there was like a button between the two of them that was like, hey, if both of you press your hand on this button, the world will be saved, they would eagerly destroy the button and then one another. Yeah, no, they're not good at dealing with stuff like that. However, I will say there does seem to be suggestion of notes that the captain of the Black Kraken from Dreadfleet may have been able to deal with the Chaos Dwarfs after he fell to Chaos. So it could be that if a dwarf is like demonstrably mutated enough, or like they can just tell he's no longer associated with the Karazhan Corps, or you know, he demonstrates enough powers similar to them in like temperament and values, maybe they're willing to deal with them and kind of handle that situation. But it's if that is true, that kind of situation has only happened once in history with that particular captain, and I've never heard of another instance where the Empire of the Dawi Zharr interacted with a renegade dwarf. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see y'all tomorrow with more questions, and until then, have a great day, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.